I want to start off by introducing myself. My name's Jim Malcolm. I have been in the photo industry and in the imaging space really my whole career. I started as a photographer when I was a wee lad, and then ended up at Rochester Institute of Technology, and back then we were taking pictures without film, if you can imagine that, in laboratories and whatever. And I joined a company called Leaf Systems, which was one of the very first digital cameras. That led to a lengthy career with Sony Electronics, and I had a great opportunity there to launch exciting products like it's pictured here, the Mavica, that took pictures onto a floppy disk. Anybody old enough to remember this one? And brave enough to admit it? Oh, right. So that was probably one of the most exciting times of my career, early on, trying to figure out how to convert people from shooting film to digital. And that led to a great opportunity where I took over the president role of Ricoh Imaging and tried to work on bringing the Pentax brand. We went and acquired Pentax, and we worked on bringing Pentax back to life. And through that process, we launched a product called the Ricoh Theta. And then I got involved in this whole VR craziness that's going on and figured out, boy, we need to do something different, and we need stereo, and we need a different type of workflow. So that's my background. And before I ask my questions, I'm going to give you just a couple little setup slides for a second. One is that we now live in a visual economy. Whether you're a creator or a consumer or a YouTuber, doesn't really matter, but there is an economy to be made money of people who are creating in this space. You don't have to necessarily be a paid creator to want to be involved in this space. That's the exciting part of what's happening in the industry right now, is that you have a lot of people who communicate via pictures as opposed to text messages. We also have to recognize we're in a different era now, right? So times have changed. Film to digital, we talked a little bit. Digital led to video. Video is now moving to visual communication, so it's these hybrid roles, it's AR and VR and all that stuff coming down. And even the production side has changed, right? So back in the old days, we did print ads, then became this whole digital media. That led to things like we need video assets, and we continue to build the market that way. And the camera market is down. I'll probably get kicked out of the building with Photo Plus here, and a ton of my friends are over there. But it's a reality. It's a tough market out there for people who are carrying cameras. It's different for the professionals, but the consumers are looking for new ways to share that work into their lifestyle, so that they can tell their stories differently. And that's one of the biggest focuses of what we're doing with the company that I work for. We also know that innovation wins. I showed this slide the other day, and somebody said, yeah, but Snapchat glasses failed. They didn't. They didn't because it got people starting to use Snapchat. Even adoption was lower than expected. It was the inspiration, it was the magic to say, hey, what can I do in this space, which led to all kinds of opportunities. Opportunities, Facebook Spaces, right? This is a 6 DOF walk around an environment and social VR. If you start to spend time in social VR, it becomes a lot easier to see where 360 production and where video fits into the bigger picture of visual communication. So now we get to the point of the questions. How many people here are experienced in 360 or VR or, oh yeah, so everybody's got experience. How many people have spent more than 10 hours in a virtual reality headset? Okay, that's good, that's good. So we got somebody. And has anybody got projects that they've actually produced? Are you in the market with things? Okay, so some of my deck is built in a way that we're gonna go all over the place, so if it gets fundamental, raise your hands and say, hey, let's dig in a little deeper. I'm fine with that. Just as a top line discussion, we think about the mobile phone all the way through to 6 DOF headsets, and 360-degree video plays well into the mobile phone. 180 VR, which we'll talk a lot about today, fits well into standalone headsets as well as the mobile phone headsets. And then 360 VR with the 2 pluses back there, meaning higher quality, higher resolution, that type of stuff is, that's going to get into the higher end headsets and require some additional work along the way. The end part of all this discussion is moving from a screen experience to an immersive experience. And we talk about an immersive experience, the letters VR have got a bit of a negative stigma on it right now. It's still misunderstood. It's changed from being, I apologize for the analogy, but a switchblade that did one thing very well into a Swiss Army knife. That now VR, I don't sit in the HR department of a company, the finance department, the advertising and creative department. There are uses for VR all along the way. So some of the buzzwords, again, depending on who you're in, you know this, so VR video. We talk about VR video, we mean in terms of having 3D, not just 360, so keep that in mind. There is this new platform called Google VR, and they call it VR 180. And it's left and right lenses, and we'll get into that in a second. Facebook has a very similar technology, also 180 degree, but they branded it 3D 180, and has a different file structure, a different file format, and different requirements. Even though they're both can be captured with the same camera systems, ultimately when they get pushed into those platforms, they're treated very differently. Spherical 360 is just like the Theta camera that I talked to you about. Ambisonic audio, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then 3D audio. Unity and Unreal, those of you who don't know, are editing, or excuse me, programming languages or systems that allow you to create computer-generated content in a VR headset. But the exciting thing is I see more and more creators pulling in 360 content into Unity and Unreal in order to add a level of interactivity or choose your own adventure or gaze detection and that kind of stuff to move people through a story. So file formats. I'm going to talk about two basic ones right now. One is over there on the left, that's stereo. So left and right eye, that's actually a very small picture of a 4K per eye render. So that's 4096 by 4096. So that way what you're getting is a full cinematic 4K for your left eye and your right eye. Now, short of going into 8K production and having all kinds of additional along the way, right now this is probably the most widely used, either at 3840 by 3840 or 4096 by 4096. The other picture down here is that VR 180 or 3D 180, whichever platform you want to look at, where you're looking at just half of the sphere and it's captured differently. Oops, I went a little bit fast. All right, so here's where it rocks at me every time I bring this up. I think this crowd is going to get it a little bit differently because you've been in the space a little bit. Apple products, Mac products are very, very behind in their GPU. And most of everything that we do I see a lot of heads bobbing, good, so hopefully no one's going to throw rocks here. But I bring it up because it's important because I've got so many videographers who are trying to make the transition into VR, and they're working in their Macs, and they're frustrated that the technology isn't there that can do it, and it's not the industry's fault, it's Apple's fault. And I've got my Mac up here. I use it for certain things, but I don't use it for VR. So let's get right to capture. I'm going to go quickly on this. So this is just the 360-degree cameras. They typically use two lenses. There are some very inexpensive things that you click onto your mobile phone, and you can do 360 images on it. This is great because it's getting more and more people accustomed and used to using and interacting with spherical media. So this is great for the industry. Take it a step further. There was a time when Ricoh Theta was the only product in the market in the 360 space. And now in 3 short years, we have filled up, and there's quite a few products out there. And there's a whole bunch of different use scenarios along the way, right? So very simple consumer things, all the way up to probably one of the more interesting active categories right now is the action cams with over capture, and you basically shoot your entire scene, and then afterwards you go back and make a standard 16:9 video out of what you captured up front. So that's the landscape there. But if you take that technology and you put it in a VR headset, in order to illuminate both sides of the headset, right, you have to duplicate the same video in your left and right eye. So that's what's called monoscopic capture, and it ultimately gives you monoscopic playback. So when you put it in a headset, if you can imagine what that night vision thing would look like to, right, kind of hone into one point, that's what mono video looks like in a VR headset. So you move into VR video. Now remember I said earlier VR video requires 3D. So typically these systems are 6 or more cameras because you want to do a full spherical piece. And when you start getting into that many cameras, you need to be able to capture parallax at every one of those points of view, right? So you need a separate left and right image. Then you've got your stereo plane, which is basically in the middle, and then you can easily move things into negative parallax, meaning objects come closer to you, and then positive parallax moves things further. And that's why when you put it into a VR headset, you can see 3D, because the headsets have both the left and a right eye. If you capture with a left and a right eye, then you're going to get that full immersion. Okay, 360 cameras that do full immersion. Companies have already gone out of business, but I haven't taken them off because there are still a lot of these in production systems, and a lot of people are using them, and some of them are worth, a rental. And yes, you got to struggle with it sometimes, but I'm not going to say there's any reason not to get involved with that. There's quite a spectrum of prices in there as well. The company I work for is Humanized Technologies. We have the stuff that's down in the lower price point because we're about trying to get more people into the art and the craft. And then, of course, you can expand up to $100,000 systems. And quite frankly, the $500,000 system that I saw at OC5, anybody hear about Manifold? No? Manifold, if you want to look it up after my talk, I want you to pay attention for now. But Manifold is a co-project between Red and Facebook. It has 16 8K helium cameras in it. I am not exaggerating. It is literally this big. And it has its own little computer dolly thing that comes with it. It's amazing. And at the end of the day, you're playing it back in a VR headset that has low resolution. So, but they're all planning for the future. And that's a $500,000 solution. So I'm a little nerdy on you for a minute. I'm going to get technical because I think you'll appreciate some of this. There are two different primary types of 360 rigs themselves, and they each kind of work differently. One are these circular systems where the cameras are laid out in a circular configuration. They do something called computational 3D, which means you have to still use math every time you create a view. And that's because if you don't have parallel paths, right, you have one lens that's looking this way and one lens this way, which are also fisheye lenses. If I'm looking this path, I'm looking down the center of the lens, but I have to look out the side of this lens. So the distortion or the warp of that is very different than the warp or the figure that's in this lens itself. So bringing those two together and turning it into an actual image does take a lot of computing power, takes a lot of math, and it does put in some complexities that could slow down your workflow, as well as things like stitch lines. So the second piece are these parallel paths. Now, those of us who have worked in stereo in the past, whether it's for doing TV or film, cinematic, or even photo, you put your cameras parallel, right? And then you have your left and right eye using identical lenses so that they match. So this type of a camera system uses basically 4 or more. The Samsung Round, which is a $10,000 camera, uses 17 cameras, one up and then all the way around. The Views camera, which is from us, we use 8. But neither here nor there. The point is, when you're making a rig or you're looking to figure out how to do this, keep in mind there are big differences, particularly around your stitch lines and the predictability of those stitch lines with the type of camera rig that you use. And then we'll get into VR 180. So VR 180 is kind of relatively new. It kind of started with with YouTube with their VR 180. It was quickly followed by Facebook. There are a number of cameras that are coming into the market. There's pros and cons to all of them that are out there, and I think one or two of these may actually be on their way out as well. But the purpose of these cameras is to really start to get people to be able to create in VR and that 180 VR using those parallel paths that we talked about. Because if you fail to do the parallel paths correctly, now you've got parallax and you've got all kinds of issues. All right, so that's an overview on the technology. Any questions? No, that's not good questions. That's dangerous. Well, I guess we'll go on.
Is there a difference in the 3D that's achieved between parallel path view and the circular system?
Yes. Yes, it's very easy when you have a circular system that your 3D will actually drop off in places, because you might be, like I said, we were talking about the distortion when you de-warp those images. Sometimes the middle you cannot necessarily get 3D. So you'll find people who are shooting with round rigs spend a lot more time going back and looking and inspecting their 3D along the way, because it does have a greater chance for failures.
How about things like close focus?
Yeah, close focus is, it's tough on all of them because you're going to deal with stitching issues. When you get into this type of a technology, you can come on camera axis very, very close, no problem. You can probably get down to 8 or 10 inches or less. The problem is that on these corners, you have 4 corners where you're going to go from this being a left eye to this being a left eye. There's going to be a stitch line here. So you can't get close on the corners of the camera. Just like in a round camera, you can't get too close to the lenses because it's all the way around. Okay. So let's to the shoot itself. So production people versus actual directors, shooters, creators. Anybody here that's actually a director or anything like that? No? Okay, a little bit? Fine, smaller start, but it all starts with the story, right? So what I like to say now is that story is the new quality. Virtual reality or VR video is something that's been, I don't know, overjudged. Pixel peepers put on a headset, like, well, I can see the pixels, right? They're watching a video from manufacturer or whatever, and like, it doesn't look good, there's not a refresh rate, there's whatever, right? The reason people are doing that, the reason people are spending so much time looking at the quality is because there's no story. That when you put somebody in a VR set, they'll be less concerned about the quality if they are entertained, informed, motivated, right? You have a proper audio field, you've got a story that sets up some characters, and you have some tension, and you have some resolution along the way. So if you're in this space, you cannot lose sight of the fact that all of this starts with a story, right? So I had a photographer that I was working, a videographer, and he went and set up a camera, and he came back and said, Jim, I look at this stuff, terrible. And I said, what'd you do? He said, well, we had the trade show, and I put the camera there, and I turned it on, and then I went back, and I was trying to use the footage. And I said, great. Would you do that with your traditional video camera? He's a videographer. He goes, no. I said, well, why? Because you couldn't just put a camera there. I have to tell a story. Like, I have to, you know, I have to do some panning shots. I have to do some placement, right? Build my story. And I'm like, why is it any different in VR? Why do you think that that doesn't exist? And he was like, you know what? I never really thought of it. Like, I just thought you put the camera down. I never realized that you still have the craft, the art of video making applies in VR. So now that we have a storyboard and we have a story, now you got to figure out how to use the space, right? So blocking your talent, blocking your actors, there are some things that you have to pay attention to. One is that we'll start in the very middle, right? Because we got this camera that you're going to sit down and scene. You have to be conscious of the fact that there is a personal space. That when you put on a VR headset, if you walk up to somebody in the camera and you get closer than that 2 feet or 3 feet or so, you're invading someone's personal space. And in a headset, it's just as uncomfortable to stand too close to somebody as it is in real life. So keep that in mind, that you always have a personal space. Then you have what I call the 3D playground, and I get in that in the next slide. And then we also have the background, that's the stuff that's furthest out. The other part that I'm going to touch on just before I do this is that while you're shooting, not only are you blocking and setting your actors and you're directing what's going on, you also have the complexity of branch narratives. So unlike traditional video where you're telling the story and it's a linear edit and you're just going to go scene to scene to scene, here the magic, your hidden tool, is to deliver something that's unexpected, or that they're like, wow, I had no idea you could do that. Like, or how did I get to that room? Or how did I get to, and then somebody else might watch the same experience and go, that's not what happened when I saw it. And it's like, because of the way those branch narratives unfold based on how people interact, and that's the video component scripted in things like Unity and Unreal to make it a really kind of choose your own adventure. But for me, the exciting choose your adventures are the ones that are not a conscious decision. So I'm looking to more and more gaze detection and eye movements in order to trigger the next delivery of VR experience. I said I was going to talk a little bit more about the playground. So the personal space, we talked a little bit about that 2 meters to 15 meters out. That's your playground. That's where you're going to be able to get an effective 3D look and feel. That's where you're going to have your actions in there. You're going to put your dialogue tracks in there. Everything's going to be like in that space, just like it was a person looking around and they have the action about it. That's also where you're going to see the most amount of your stereo. This little chart over here shows that drop off of stereo, because the further something's away from you, the less you see of depth because of the parallax. So unless you had a way to move your eyes apart, right, there's really no way for you to see depth at distance, which is why that beyond 15 meters, you're just going to be on the background, and think of it as a matte background. And sometimes people will actually shoot a matte and then put their video inside of that matte using some filters. All right, 3D audio. I cannot understate the importance of audio in VR. It's the same challenge that you have in video, right? You're a videographer today. You would never deliver a product to a client without audio track, right? Without music, without clean audio, everything else. So keep in mind that audio is extremely important to your story, not only to engage and to entertain, but also if you start activating things like ambisonics and 3D audio, you can then put sound cues in your video so that when you hear something behind you, oh, I better look. There's something coming up, there's something. And it could be used for tension, right? You could have it, you have something that's really interesting going on here, but you hear footprints or footsteps coming up behind you, right? This type of stuff adds to the tension and the drama in the story. All right. I said the word stitch a few times. Cover your ears if you don't like really friendly words, but I'm going to say stitch is a bitch. Stitch is the hardest thing to do in the technology right now for a couple of reasons. One is because it's very intensive on computing power to be able to do it. Second of all, it varies based on distance for the most part, is the easiest way to think about stitching. So you're actually going to stitch for a point in space, and unless you go and know exactly where that space is, it's very difficult to stitch. Most of the camera manufacturers have their own software that they use to stitch with. I encourage you to please try all the manufacturer software first before you go to something like Mystica. Mystica VR is probably the leading stitching software in the market right now. But the manufacturer's stuff is designed to work specifically with the cameras. And like in our case, we take a camera, we put it in a control room, take control files of that, and then we load that into the firmware of the camera. So we know exactly what each one of those lenses is looking at, so that when we stitch, we can apply the corrections for the camera. If you go to third-party software, you can't do that. But just keep that in mind when you're going down that path. Once you're done stitching, aside from it being a challenge, that was the thing I wanted to say. And I know some folks from our IT here, so they may not. I would recommend to spend as little time as possible learning how to stitch. If you, in becoming an expert stitcher, you will go the way of the typesetter back when digital prepress came out. Because the technology is getting better, the sensors are getting better in the camera, not just the imaging sensors themselves, but other sensing ways to figure out where the depth is and to automate stitching. So maybe not next year, maybe not the next year, but eventually these cameras will auto stitch. Maybe it's all going to be done in the cloud on supercomputers. There is, in my opinion, there is not a career to be had in becoming an expert stitcher, because I think it's going to go away. All right, which brings us to post. There are a few tools out there, Vegas, the Final Cut Pro, as well as Adobe Premiere Pro, Final Cut. I say choose wisely because every one of them have a different capability as it relates to VR. And it matters, and I'm going to bring you through a couple examples here in a minute as to why it matters. Choose wisely. All of them are trying to get more and more VR and 360 capabilities built in. Today I'm going to use Adobe Premiere Pro as kind of a sample thing. I'm just going to start up a project. I'm going to show you just a few features. Even though this is Adobe Premiere Pro, I will tell you I am no pro at Premiere. I'm a camera guy. I'm a creator. I'm not an editor. So I actually recorded some screens so I didn't embarrass myself up here. Hopefully they actually work correctly. If they don't, then I've got a backup computer. We'll figure it out. But the first thing I want to talk to you about, if you haven't used Premiere Pro for 360, how to actually view VR or the VR viewing within Premiere. Anybody use that? A couple of you, so good. So this will be kind of new news. What I'm going to do is just start this and I'll try to talk about it while we're doing it. There's a little button down here at the bottom that you can push and your equirectangular video into a video that you can look around. But the size of it, like you saw, was just square. So two things. One is if you don't have that little icon of a headset, just go in and pull it into your toolbar from that setup. The second thing is you can go in and actually change the field of view. So here I don't know, 100 and something. And then when you go back in and hit that toggle button, now you got a wider field of view. All right? So the other thing you want to do in here, a nice thing to do in here, I should say, is also go into view. And there's a few ways to look at your video. You can look at your left eye or your right eye, or probably the most important one right here is to go to the anaglyph. And this way, if you see the little cyan red in there, that's actually showing you your 3D disparity. So if you have those old school blue glasses, you can get them on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. But I moved to a different part of the video just so you can see that shadowing that's in there. That's what you're going to be able to see, and you'll be able to see your stereo much easier. And this is why if you're using a 360 camera that's round in shape, it's extra important to get into because you'll be able to see, using the anaglyph mode, what differentiation there is in there or disparity there is, and if it's dropping off throughout your scene, which sometimes can be fixed. You just have to go back and restitch it. Sometimes it can't be fixed. It's just something with the property of the optics themselves. So that's a quick way to take that rectangular, crazy video format and be able to interact with it. The second piece I'm going to talk about is color. And the latest edition of Adobe Premiere Pro has some really great color correction tools. Now, you can go out and get DaVinci, and there's other color grading software out there that's absolutely amazing. But whatever effects that you do, including color, you have to make sure you do it identical left and right eye. And sometimes you'll have a different shadow in your left eye versus your right eye and everything else, and you can really throw your color for a loop. So in this particular case, I'll just start this little video real quickly how to say. So what I did is, this is Times Square, and these are the famous red jackets that everybody wears down there. So I just sampled one part of that. And now under this, the new hue selection, or not hue, but the RGB curves, you can actually choose that specific color, and then you can adjust your color curves, and then that will apply equally your left and right eye to your entire video. So you can do selective color, you can do saturation, you can do all of your curves and everything else. But again, it's very important to always apply equal left and right eye. And while I'm on it, I'll say never use something like a vignette type filter, because although it may look good in 2D, when it goes and wraps together as a 3D, the two pieces won't match because the algorithms that they use when they use those things, they don't match. And so you'll get these weird lines that are really hard to get rid of. So it's quite easy to do color. Now, titles is probably one of the most difficult pieces when you start getting into post. Like, everybody wants in. It's another one I'm going to tell you. It's really hard to do. If you try to do it by hand and you're going to line up this one and try to get the distance correct and everything else, it almost never works. So again, back to Adobe. They've done a great job. What I've been happy with them, what they did here, is that their Essential Graphics tablet now all can be applied to VR. So you can grab any title that you want out of the Essentials graphics and just simply put it into your view. Now, it defaults in the center, as it does with any other. And this is where the problem begins, because it's not going to be in stereo because we have both a left and right eye. So I just went in and changed the shape of it. And then down here, this great little slider, you can just pull back and you can scale that. You'll want to scale it really big at first, and you'll see why here in a minute. Now if I go into 3D mode, or stereo VR mode, and I look, that's what happened to my title. Because it's in the middle of the frame, but remember that frame is a left and a right eye, so now I've split it and spread it. So now you gotta go into your Effects tab, and in Effects, you search for something called VR Sphere to Plane, or Plane to Sphere. So it takes a flat image and applies it to the sphere. So when you do it, it automatically puts both a left and a right eye image centered down in your field of view. So when you play it, it actually is proper on your screen, okay? So not so hard to do, but there are extra steps, right? There are extra steps when you start doing titling and graphics and everything else. And all of these tools, the plane to sphere, you can bring in company logos, you can bring in other videos. That's another really interesting one to do, like picture in picture. But if you put it higher in the field of view, then it needs to warp it in order to fit there properly. And Premiere Pro does that. I should ask them for a free subscription or something, I don't know. And so one of the other big ones that we run into is people that want to combine 2D and 3D together. But I'll give you the real world case example that I probably answer most often, which is, hey Jim, I made a great video and I've flew my GoPro Fusion on my drone. And now I want to put drone footage into my video. Well, remember we were back to that, anything beyond 15 meters, you don't see depth anyway, so you get a pass. You can use a 360-degree camera to record things at distance and then put it into a headset. Typically, that's really hard, but there's a little bit of digital magic that can help you along the way. And that first you go in and you set your VR properties for your sequence, if they're not already set. So here I'm just telling you it's equirectangular, I'm telling you it's stereoscopic top-bottom, 360 degree by 180 degree. So you do that first, it says, hey, you're changing the sequence, so you really want to do that? You say yes. Then you go and you find the other 2D footage that you want to put in there. When you grab the 2D footage and you bring it onto your timeline, and then I'll bring the scrub bar over here and we'll see, where I have top and bottom there, here I've got image stretched out that I can't really do much with. But if I go into VR projection, grab that plugin, drop it on my timeline, now Premiere Pro automatically resizes that left and right eye, sets the stereo at distance, right? So it's going to be at your distance field, so you're not going to have parallax on it, and then you're done. You can fake 3D, actually in here, I didn't actually put it in here, but you can fake 3D in a 2D video by going over to the settings, the effects settings, and you can change the disparity. So you can actually move them apart, and you can actually fake and make it look like 3D. Again, I would suggest that you use that technique wisely. People that do that well, they're not doing the entire 360, but maybe they just pull in a single element, and then they can put a mask on the element, and then just have it set out, you know, left and right eye, and it looks like it's floating over something, or you know, that type of a thing. I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about 3D audio again. 3D audio is incredibly important to the VR space. In fact, I've got this great project. If anybody wants to do a really fun, weird project, if you know anybody who's really into 3D audio, really? I've got a really cool project. It's really spooky. It's kind of a ghost chasers type thing. Anyway, I'll tell you about it later. It's kind of cool. But anyway, in order to get into 3D audio, you need to make sure that your system is set up properly for it. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go to your timeline setting down here, and it's going to bring up a field, and here you're going to select adaptive. So you have things like mono and stereo and 5.1. You want to go adaptive, and that will be your default settings. So you set it to adaptive, and then when you bring files in that have that field, or have the 3D audio, it'll maintain it. If you don't do that, if you pull in a 3D audio feed and you put it onto your timeline, it'll default to either stereo or 5.1 or whatever it is that you had set. So keep that in mind. Do make sure you go in and set adaptive for anything. I leave mine on adaptive by default now. I don't know if there's a mistake or a problem in doing that, but that's just kind of my workflow. The last official slide that I have is why care, right? I talked a lot about some different technologies. I talked a lot about 360, but there's curiosity. And that curiosity is giving creators and innovators and forward thinkers a tool that their competitors don't have. So the opportunity to differentiate yourself in the market and to be able to provide something that other people or other companies cannot provide, that's the winning formula. And the fact that you're all here tells me that you already get that. So I'm kind of preaching to the choir a little bit. The other piece is fun. It's challenging. Yes, it's a bit nerdy. Yes, I've sat around with a headset too many times. People are like, what is wrong with that guy? Like, he's lost his mind. But it's fun. It really is. And what's fun for me with it is the power to alter someone's, like, until you fully get immersed, until you had that first emotional experience in a headset, this is really hard to get. Who here has been in a headset and has cried in a headset? The answer is nope. I have. And I'm not afraid to admit it. There is a video, it's called Dear Angelica. It's our experience. It is not a video. It's actually created entirely in tilt brush. It was painted or drawn all in tilt brush. And it is the story of a lady who's saying goodbye to her mom in a hospital bed. I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. I really am. So there's this drawing of this mom in the bed. She's dying in the hospital. And this girl is saying her goodbyes. And in 6DoF, right, fully immersive environment, you can look around the bed. You can look down and you can see the interaction between them. It is incredibly well illustrated and such a powerful story. I am absolutely blown away. This is my challenge to everybody in this room, that every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, special occasion, the Budweiser ad can come on, or we did some for Sony back in my Sony days for quarters, and you can make people cry in 30 seconds. 30-second spot can move you, leave you with emotions that will change your life. Yet I don't see it happening all the time in VR. My last two bullets there, it's a movement I haven't seen. I started this conversation by saying I had the pleasure of working with companies like Sony and getting people from shooting pictures on film onto floppy disks to now we have these incredibly powerful computers in our pocket that also take pictures. Video and imaging is not going away. The tools that we use are certainly changing, which leads to nothing but opportunity. So the category as a new tool in your toolbox, and then go create. Go do what you do, which is to create and tell stories and be visual communicators, and that's a huge space for you. So that was all that I had prepared. Hopefully that wasn't too high level or too low level, and hopefully you learned something along the way. Thank you very much for your attention.